Welcome everybody here to the Lakers Lounge. I'm Anthony Irwin. Today joined by somebody who I had on the pod forever ago, continues to write about really interesting things, and I keep meaning to have him back onto the pod. And for whatever reason, it just hasn't come to fruition quite yet. But this person is legitimately one of the most creative people I know. He writes for the New York Times, but he has a novel out, he has a memoir out, and he just recently or had a play staged out there in New York. Because we're just running laps around people at this point. Sopan Deb of the Times, thank you very much for hopping on with me. Like at some point, it'd be nice if you just like slowed down just a little bit, just a little.
Who can sleep with all this excitement, Anthony? Who can sleep? Who has time for slowing down?
How you been, man? How you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. I'm starved for NBA talk. It's August, so it's like the dead zone for the NBA right now. So
well, it's not only is it August, but it's the first August we've had in years.
Yes.
Like where, you know what I mean? Like we had, because the pandemic pushed the one season way back, they launched the next season, like the next business day. So you didn't really have an off season that, a couple of years ago. And then there was another off season after that one that was only a couple months long. So this is the first off season where it's like a full length off season. And yeah, I am just sitting here rewatching Harry Potter, I guess. Like we just like there's nothing that I actually have to talk to my family. I have to be a father. This is just weird. I don't know what to do here.
Yeah, man. And not just not just that it's the off season. It's like it's been a kind of quiet off season in the grand scheme of things, right? Like there was, a lot of talk about Dame and et cetera, but like, what was the biggest offseason splash this summer? It's probably, is it Kristaps to the Celtics? I really can't think of. It hasn't been like,
do you remember Austin Reeves re-signing?
Yeah, Austin Reeves re-signing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the summer of 2019 when I think it was 2019, like Kemba goes to the Celtics, KD and Kyrie go to the Nets. I think Kawhi and Paul George go to the Clippers. Like, and that's like 3 of 20 such move. I think Westbrook moved that summer. Chris Paul, I think, moved that summer. I don't remember. But that was crazy. Now it's like, what happened this summer? Like it was Kristaps Porzingis who made an all-star team once. And then everything else has been kind of Dame. Like is Dame, will they, won't they? And that's James Harden, I guess. But even that, it's like he hasn't gone anywhere.
Yeah. This was kind of unique in that like the offseason took place and then stopped. And then the NBA world stopped because Dame requested the trade and James Harden started with his like kind of annual nonsense and stuff. And it has been like I've been waiting for the Lakers to sign Christian Wood or at least like come to an agreement with Christian Wood for like 2 weeks now, just so I can put a wrap on all of my offseason analysis
Christian
and stuff.
Wood. Like it's come to that where it's August and you're like, I really got to find out what's happening with Christian Wood.
I keep trying.
I must know. I must know which team is giving Christian Wood the minimum to come play. I must.
Know that. I don't normally have this kind of infatuation about Christian Wood until like December, right? Until we all do a lot more praying than usual. But I am. The reason I wanted to talk to you today, though, there's a lot going on kind of in very niche corners of the kind of the NBA universe. And Ethan Strauss and Andrew Marchand wrote recently about the changes going on at ESPN and how they might relate to the NBA kind of applying a little bit more pressure to ESPN because the NBA has more leverage than it has in years past because of some of the issues that we're seeing at Disney. And then, this came on the heels of while I was in Vegas, this was a couple weeks ago, you put out a piece for the Times about a boot camp that former players are going to learn how to be analysts and stuff. And I find all of this really interesting, and I think it all really ties in together And I really wanted to start with the piece itself because the response to it caught you by surprise. It felt like in my back and forth with you, I kind of recall you going like, why are people surprised by this? So like, what caught you by surprise there?
All right. So the crux of the story is that the NBA Players Union runs this program. They've run it for decades, where they teach current and former players how to be a broadcaster.
Mm-hmm.
And as part of that camp, part of the camp includes kind of training players on how to be hot take artists. Train them to be part of debate shows like what Skip Bayless does, and First Take and Kendrick Perkins, etc. And people took that part of it, and they got like mad that the union was doing this. And I found that to be so odd because it's like, well, what? Like it's just a program to help players get jobs after they're done playing, or maybe even now or whatever. And okay, so that's one part of it. The second part of it is people are really, got mad, like, the hot take, blah, blah, blah is, let me tell you something, man. People, constantly always say, oh, we don't want hot takes. We want like, listen, man, if that was the case, and I say this with all due respect to like John Hollinger and the Nate Duncans of the world, like, those guys, like, can you imagine if First Take was hosted by Nate Duncan, John Hollinger, and like Zach Lowe? Like, right? Like, who
Zach is good on those shows, though. Zach is legitimately good on those shows. All those guys. But like as a seasoning,
but like everyone says that. But then the shows that bring in the actual numbers, the high rating shows are not, let's break down the VORP of the VORP NBA Friday VORP breakdown. That's not what it is. It's not. That's not what brings in numbers. If you look at the highest rated shows, it's the Stephen A. Smith. If you go to Fox Sports 1, it's whatever Skip Bayless' show is, and so people are complaining about those shows, but they consume those shows at the same time. If there was it's like a very free market situation where if people really wanted like this kind of hot, like this nuanced kind of breakdown of X's and O's, there would be those shows would do better. I don't know. I just so I was just kind of surprised. But leaving all that aside, I was just surprised that people were like bashing the union for having this program in place to help current and former players get jobs. It's like,
I didn't sense as much. Like the annoyance that I had, because I do kind of wish that we had something other than like, old white guy, black guy screaming at each other. And that is like that's basically like the crux of every daytime sports show right now. Right. And I wish that, we had something else to offer. But, all that said, Levitard made this point the other day, and it's been hard to like not think of it this way. But he said that, the people who were watching daytime sports television, think of them as like the Jerry Springer audience, like, and of like sports fandom. And I'm not gonna paint with a broad brush there, but I kind of understand what he's talking about. Like the people who wish that they had more nuance there are the people who probably have their own content that they wish people would be taking in, right? Twitter, at the end of the day, winds up being like a bunch of content creators talking to each other about their content, right? And trying to plug their content. Twitter makes up such a small aspect of the sports conversation, the sports universe. And I did notice that like this was, I think, to your point, one of those spots where Twitter really doesn't represent the real world, right? Twitter, you're going to have a lot of people saying like, man, I really wish we could have like more Tim Legler and more of that stuff. And it's like the point of it kind of misses the point of those shows. The point of the show isn't to be right. Like the point of the show.
They have one. Okay, so I talked to
to be entertaining.
Rob Parker, who's been a long time kind of debate format dude.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was on ESPN for a long time. Now he's at Fox Sports. He has a radio show with Chris Broussard. He's like, he gives this a piece of advice to the players. And the piece of advice, and it really stuck with me. He gives me, he goes, you don't ever have to worry about being wrong. Do not worry about being wrong.
There's actually money in being wrong. A lot of it.
He's like, listen, if you guys were right about this is sports. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And if you guys were right, okay, you wouldn't be on TV. You'd be at the slots. You'd be gambling. Okay.
Yeah.
You'd get rich off that. Okay. You don't ever worry about being right. Remember, their job is not to be right or wrong. Their job is to be entertaining.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's the job. And so to that end, and then like, whether you find that entertaining or not, look, is it my type of thing? It's not. But you know, Rob kind of brought the crystallized this point for me. It's like, it's sports. You know, we're talking about sports. You know, from the actual product perspective, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Like you're a Lakers fan, man. If the Lakers win the championship, you'll be happy as like a fan, but it doesn't really materially affect your life that much, right? It's a distraction.
Well, I'm somewhat different because like the Lakers being good helps my ratings, which does material help my
Sure.
life. But other Laker fans who were listening, like it doesn't actually impact their day to day.
No, and I'm not saying that like the Lakers aren't important to fans or the Celtics or whatever. I'm just saying at the end of the day, sports is entertainment. It's a distraction. And so the punditry surrounding it more often than not is not going to be particularly serious. It's just how it is. And there's a reason that unserious punditry kind of gets the biggest ratings. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it's been interesting the last couple of days, the big controversy in sports because there just isn't very much sports right now. But you know, the women's national team clear the group stage by tying Portugal, right? And they dance and they take pictures with family. And Carly Lloyd goes on Fox Sports and like heavily criticizes them and says that isn't what we stand for, and we expect more than to be happy with tying, right? And I've found the response to that really interesting because she's saying a lot of the stuff that I feel like gets said by former players about, you know, current teams that like in baseball, you see these grand parties in the clubhouse whenever a team gets to the playoffs or officially like makes the playoffs or whatever. And you know, you'll see the occasional former player step up and be like, "Why are you guys celebrating merely getting to the playoffs?" You know, and I don't necessarily
ridiculous, by the way. Not the celebration to get to the playoffs. It's the notion that it shouldn't be celebrated.
Yeah, right. I agree, but I feel like the dunking on that doesn't go to the extent that I've noticed recently with Carly Lloyd, right? Mm-hmm. And you know, one of my former colleagues, somebody I really respect, Sabrina Merchant, who covers women's basketball for The Athletic, she and I will talk all the time, and it's just like I'm always kind of surprised, for lack of a better term, at how polite women's coverage is, you know, and I found the response to Carly Lloyd, like straight up calling them out, really interesting because I felt like it was, for lack of a better term, at times like almost paternal and and patronizing and you know, with the punditry. I saw somebody on there saying like the point of journalism is never to be the story, and I'm like, Carly Lloyd's not a journalist though. Like, what are we missing here? And like the response to your story really struck me because the skill that these guys are learning isn't to be right about basketball, isn't to like be more right than the next person about basketball or learning how to research VORP or anything like that. The skill that they're actually honing is that entertainment aspect. So like most people on Twitter are going to say that Carly Lloyd screwed up at her job by having a bad take or whatever. But most TV people, I feel like, are going to be like, nope, Carly did her job really well because that was a 2-day conversation cycle about Carly Lloyd and about the show that she was on. So like, how do you think that like players should approach that? Like, do you think that is something that is that a skill that you think former players should continue to hone? Or do you think we're ever going to reach a kind of an evolution point where like JJ Redick is really thoughtful? Draymond Green can be very thoughtful. Like, do you think we'll start to see that where those guys have had kind of meteoric rises because they don't really delve into the hot take stuff?
I think what makes someone a good analyst varies from person to first person.
Okay.
So, for example, what makes JJ Redick great, and I do think he's an excellent, he's actually quite thoughtful and he breaks down the game, but he's also entertaining. What makes JJ Redick great is that you could tell he's not pulling punches, whether he is or is not, but you could tell he's going in there and he's saying things like, he's willing to kind of.
He called Mad Dog Russo a Fox News type of
he's willing to
analyst.
blast through the kind of fake collegiality that we expect of our analysts, right?
Yeah.
And so what makes him great is what is different than what makes someone like Hubie Brown great, right? Like, to me, Hubie Brown's also great, but Hubie Brown, what makes him great to listen to on a broadcast to me is his infectious joy for the game. Right.
Yeah.
And there's a real value to that, but like if Hubie Brown suddenly tried to do what JJ Redick does, it would be weird. It would be like, man, that's weird. What I think makes to me as a viewer is, when someone's doing it for clicks and when someone is doing it to be honest. And I think the core of a great analyst is you have to be true to yourself. Because I think viewers can see through inauthenticity.
Absolutely.
I really do. So, what makes JJ Redick really good is not his, willingness to dabble in analytics. And I mean, that's part of it. But he has a genuine passion for his points. And that's what makes him interesting. And so, he has a genuine passion for defending this generation of NBA players. Genuine passion for defending stats. Genuine passion for the game. And so to me, that's what makes him a great analyst. But it all comes from one thing, which is honesty. And sometimes you feel you watching these debate shows and it's like, well, someone had to take the contrary point here, and it doesn't feel like he's being genuine here.
It feels like debate class. Yeah.
And so those are the ones that stuff turns me on. But also, I'm not the target audience here. Neither are you, for that matter. Like, you and I are not your average consumer of NBA content. You and I take in much more of it. So those shows aren't geared towards us. It's geared to far more kind of everyday people who aren't like trolling NBA Reddit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You and I are not the people that those shows are meant to appeal to.
Yeah. Neither is Twitter at large, frankly. Like, they're making those 30-second clips to try to get to Twitter and try to collect as many views as they can. But yeah, it kind of falls short there. But you mentioned, though, like the originality and how important it is that we feel like this is the genuine nature of whose ever voice that we're talking about here, right? Like, as you were talking, Charles Barkley came to mind, because Charles is like never not Charles. He's like, he refuses to like ever not be Charles Barkley.
I'm sorry if I can just cut you off for a second.
Yeah,
inside the NBA is a perfect example.
Yeah,
like sometimes they're so not knowledgeable about players that it's become a recurring segment. I think it's like, how many players can
who
Shaq
he play for?
Yeah, who he play for? Thank you. Yes, yeah. They literally make light of how little they follow the every ins and outs of the sport, and it's the greatest sports, studio show that's ever existed, ever.
Yeah, it's because it isn't really a sports studio show; it's a show. Like it's what would happen. It was like it was the first podcast, is what it basically is.
And you know what? Even as a fan. Even though I know they're not following the sport as closely as, most kind of analysts are, even though I know that, I'm still there. Their studio shows are appointment television for me. And why is that? It's because it stems from honesty. You feel like you're watching a genuine discussion about basketball between people that know what they're talking about, people that play the game, and
love each other, like, and actually like care about each other. Like, that's something that, like, it's a big part of this, but the reason like they came to mind, and the reason JJ came to mind, and as I was reading your piece again for the Times, that I will link in the show notes, but if you have this kind of boot camp where they are teaching former athletes the art of the hot take, doesn't that take away from some of that originality that authenticity? Doesn't it somewhat, if all these guys are going there and like learning how to deliver a hot take, and like one thing that really kind of struck me as I was reading was how a lot of the hot takes that that these guys are kind of sort of being taught sounds alike, where they're just kind of shitting on this current iteration of basketball, and it's like my game was better and actually I was a better, and people forget I was a bucket. Paul Pierce is like the kind of headliner of that content. Do you think like do you think they're potentially creating cookie cutter, plug and
Well,
plug in type of
well,
analysts?
but why is that? I don't know that I buy that premise, because they also took like podcasting lessons in that boot camp, or color commentary lessons. And why is it that one would be considered like legitimate training, but the hot takes one, it's like you're learning how to give hot takes, but what you're learning is how to be on television and to deliver sound bites. Whereas when you're talking about podcasting, it's a different skill. Right?
Yeah.
Like what you are doing is a different skill than what Malik Andrews does. Right?
Yeah.
And so you're just learning a different skill. And in the case of like the debate show, what you're learning is how do you deliver an argument in a succinct, TV friendly way, okay, that is entertaining. That's what you're learning. And those are skills. So those are skills that those guys have to learn on for television. And you have to get used to like sitting on the set, looking at a camera, not looking at a camera. You have to get used to like excuse me, on a podcast.
Not doing that.
In a podcast, you and I kind of can take our time and have this thoughtful discussion. On those shows, you have like 15 seconds to say Nikola Jokic is the fifth best player ever, not number one. Nikola Jokic can't carry a team to the NBA championship. He can't do that. Blah, blah. You have 15 seconds to make your point, and then you got to keep moving. Right?
Yeah.
So you're learning the skills on how to be on television. I mean, I don't see that as inherently problematic. I mean, and at the end of the day, even if you were doing it if you take the worst faith explanation for this, even if you do that, guess what? The audiences want it. The audience, what we have learned about what audiences want out of sports programming that isn't live sports is that they love debate shows. That's why they keep doing it.
Yeah.
There's a reason that Stephen A. Smith is the biggest star at ESPN. Okay. It's not because of heady beat reporting from 20 years ago. Okay. It's not because it's not, people are interested in seeing him get into these kind of verbal altercations with Chris Russo, with JJ Redick, whomever. And the viewers like really want to see him get taken down a peg, or see his partner get taken down a peg, whatever.
Yeah.
Even if these players were learning how to give hot takes, that's what the market says people want out of their sports talk shows.
As you were talking, I was thinking like it would be nice if we had some alternate content on those channels, on those platforms, just to see what the response to them would be like. And, as I was thinking about that, Bomani and Pablo had their show together, which didn't last very long. And yeah, to a certain extent, that's what happens when an audience that you're hoping to watch TV at that time isn't watching TV at that time. And the daytime ESPN viewer, again, is watching that for the reasons that you're talking about. And I guess Pablo and Bomani's show would probably have to succeed a little later at night, and would take in a different kind of audience. But the next kind of step here is what we're seeing go on with Mark Jackson and Jeff Van Gundy being fired by ESPN. The reports again from Strauss and from Marchand of their outlets saying that Adam Silver is maybe applying a little bit more pressure to ESPN to provide, I guess, a friendlier view than certainly Van Gundy was offering in those biggest broadcasts of the NBA season. And, I wrote about it last night. And initially, look, I'm not going to lie. I'm excited to not have to listen to Mark Jackson and Jeff Van Gundy like yell and scream about how many threes are being taken during a big nationally broadcast game. I am really excited for Doris Burke to get the opportunity that I think she really deserves. I personally would have gone with Richard Jefferson or with JJ instead of Doc Rivers, but I also understand it. ESPN wants a head coach in that spot. and he's potentially going to be cheaper because he's currently on an NBA contract. Um, I I am a little nervous though about the NBA having more power at ESPN because the NBA isn't interested in like the creative content industry. They are in the PR industry. They want their league presented as positively as possible. And the example I used when I wrote about it last night was Playmakers. Remember that show in like the early 2000s?
Oh, wow.
Remember that? And it was
Don't
like,
make me feel old. It's bringing up Playmakers.
remember?
Next thing you'll bring up is sports. What was that show that ESPN had? Sports reporters.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
They had a poker show.
The NBA on NBC.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Well, that might be coming back. But yeah, Playmakers though was a popular show. It was doing pretty well ratings wise. It is still fairly critically acclaimed. I think it has an 8.4 rating on IMDb and on Amazon of what people feel about the show now. And it was canceled because the NFL said they didn't like the way that they were even indirectly being presented or portrayed in that show. And that was kind of a bummer because it was this like kind of creative and cool thing that ESPN was trying and succeeding in, and then it was just gone. And I don't think that we're going to see wholesale change. I think Stephen A has too much power at ESPN for them to just be like, all right, we're rethinking everything. And I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, but I am a little nervous about like what creative pressure the NBA might be applying here. Do you think that's misplaced concern? Do you think they could apply so much pressure that the way that they get talked about is more boring, or do you think that we might actually see more JJs and more Richard Jeffersons and in place because the NBA likes the way that they talk about the sport more than the Stephen A's and maybe the Kendrick Perkins do?
So let's put the Disney thing, the ESPN layoffs, into the larger context.
Okay.
Which is that ESPN, as you know and your viewers know, is owned by Disney. Disney has really struggled these last couple of years. I believe theme park attendance is down. ESPN ratings have obviously gone way down, as has the rest of television at large.
Mm-hmm.
Disney made a big bet on streaming, which hasn't really panned out in the way they wanted it to pan out. And so ESPN and Disney has looked to cut costs. And that's where all these layoffs have come from.
Yeah.
And now ESPN, which used to be kind of a huge moneymaker for Disney, is no longer a huge moneymaker for Disney. Now it's something that they are thinking about spinning off, selling. And one of the things that's been reported is that ESPN is looking at a couple sports leagues to have partial ownership of the networks. Now, that would be unprecedented.
Yeah.
Now, if you think about it, there's already been the leagues have already been in bed with ESPN, right? Through these broadcast deals that ESPN pays billions for.
Yep.
So is it problematic that a league would have a partial stake in a network that also purportedly does some journalism to hold that league accountable? I mean, one would argue that ESPN hasn't been a journalistic outlet in many, many years. It has journalists that work there, but it's not like you can't on one level pay a league billions and then cover them and there not be an ethical kind of conflict there. With the NBA partially owning ESPN or whatever, if that ends up happening, that would take it to a new level, right? Then you're no longer an impartial. You can't even claim to be an impartial observer at that point. Should that worry you? To the extent that it's less independent coverage of a big corporation, yeah, probably, but
I didn't even mention that aspect of it because I this is kind of like me being cynical, probably overly cynical, but I just don't think very many people care about like journalism, or they won't care until we find out like actually we should have really cared all along. But
right, it's one of those things like if the NBA has more involvement in like shaping coverage, what that looks like. And there are worlds in which let me give you an example of where I could see that being problematic. As you probably saw, I wrote two pieces now about, excuse me, the Orlando Magic writing under the team name, giving a $50,000 donation to a super PAC dedicated to the campaign of Ron DeSantis. You know, like NBA like does a good job of kind of promoting itself as this socially conscious league.
Yeah.
What you don't hear about when you see that branding, you don't hear about the owners that spend a ton of money to undermine, to fight back against what the NBA is doing.
Yeah.
Right? So,
and this is just one example. Like you could go through any number of political checks that have been written by these owners for various, for various lobbying.
You could see a world in which ESPN becomes an official PR arm of a league that has a stake in the league, in the network, excuse me. And is that problematic in the grand scheme of things? Probably. Do fans care? I don't know. I mean, I highly doubt it. You know, fans often don't really care much about journalism in a meaningful way. They just want to. They don't want to see how the sausage is made. They don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, there was all the reporting done on the way that like Adam Schefter and Adrian Wojnarowski do their reporting,
I mean, great example, right? Like, and fans don't care.
No, I was like, hey, this probably isn't great. Or the other example that happened recently was with Shams, right? With the draft and who was going second overall, and how he was saying that actually it looks like it might be Brandon. God, how am I already blanking on his name? It might be Brandon Miller. Nope. Now it might be Scoot. And nope. Now we're back to Brandon. And like the odds kept on changing, and people kept on putting bets on one side or the other. And it was just like, and he's employed by FanDuel, so that makes it a little awkward. And I thought like that would be finally the time that with people's money at stake, that all right, we're gonna finally care about journalism. And now it's kind of a fart noise.
I'm in a bit of an awkward position here because Shams is employed by the New York Times Company, and
I'm not. I'm just.
Am I?
Yeah. I just
continue to be employed by the New York Times Company. So
I just throw out examples of like the of like you're talking about sports fans being more interested in the information and not so much the process that leads to that information being conveyed. And, that's where you and I probably are going to look at some potential conflicts with ESPN and the NBA partnering the way that they might. And the NFL, like we already saw, by the way, like during the whole CTE saga, we saw what it looked like when ESPN.
That's a great example of the CTE saga, where the journalism matters.
Yeah.
Or, I look at, I didn't do this reporting, but I look at my colleagues who wrote about like Deshaun Watson, that's where the journalism really matters. That's where, to expose like malfeasance is really, important, and that's where the journalism really matters. If you don't look at it as a game, okay, look at it as a company, and that's where the journalism really matters. How the company uses its platform, how the company treats, scandal that breaks, what kind of scandals are there? That's where the journalism really matters and should matter to fans. But I'm not, that's a battle that I can't fight.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like this is very much an off-season topic, and whatever it looks like is still remains to be seen. And I think generally speaking, it's what I'm really fascinated by is because of the state of things at Disney, the NBA might have a little bit more creative power here over them. That might not really be the case as much with Turner, and the NBA could try to apply whatever pressure they want to the Inside the NBA show and what that looks like and sounds like, but they also like can't because it's such
If there's a show that I'm fully convinced would not care what anyone tells them to say, it's not the NBA. I did a feature on Kenny Smith like 3 or 4 years ago, and I asked him how many times he'd gotten a talking to about something, or anybody on the team. I think I asked him how many times they'd gotten a talking to, like about something they've said on the air, and I think he told me the answer was 0.
Yeah. Well, I think they're pretty untouchable. Like, that show is too popular, I think, to be told anything. I think they kind of just know, like, all right, Chuck's going to say Chuck stuff. I think Chuck even came out the other day and said that he falls asleep during some bad games, like while on the job. And like, you know, it takes an amount of comfort to be willing to come out and say that. And look, like, they've earned it, by the way. It's a great TV show. I don't know how great it is as an NBA show. I don't know how well they're informing, you know, people who are watching about the NBA, but that clearly isn't isn't what they're going for. But yeah, I'm really curious what all this is going to look like. I was really interested and fascinated by the response to your piece. And do think that, like, it was a very online response to it. I think most people are going to read that, or most people, I think, did read that and said, you know, off of Twitter, okay, cool. They're helping these guys find a career after their playing days are over. I think, like, the response to how dare they force these guys to learn how to give the hot take, and man, all of this content is going to hell because all that matters is the hot take. I think that was a little extreme. Though, you know, to your point, the successes of, you know, JJ and Draymond, maybe eventually, like that if people want more thoughtful stuff about that, then they really should be pulling for the JJs, the Leglers, the you know, the Draymonds of the world, the Richard Jeffersons of the world, who do offer that. And then the more that they're successful, the more of that stuff that we're going to see.
And by the way, Richard Jefferson's a great example. Again, a great analyst, someone I really enjoy watching on TV, but he's great on whether he's great at the X's and O's of basketball or immaterial to me. He's funny. He's fun to watch. That's what makes me want to watch him on television. You know, do I really care if he breaks down like the 1-4 pick and roll that much? Not really. I mean, honestly, I don't. I just don't.
Yeah.
You know, I just think it's funny. Like, when him and Perk go at it on the air, I just think it's great television. That's what matters.
Yeah. I did not have on my, like, post-career bingo card Kevin Garnett being like one of the few guys who really props up this era. I would have thought for sure he would have been harder on the sport than he is.
Kevin Garnett.
Yeah, he's very much like Allen Iverson. Like, Allen Iverson's, like, you know, post-career has been really interesting because he does, like, love and adore the sport. I wish he was on more platforms, though. I don't think anybody trusts him to be on those platforms very regularly. Garnett's an interesting one, though. He's on Showtime and stuff, and he does say a lot of nice things about the league. And I do kind of wonder if the NBA is going to, like, slide him in or do what they can to be like, hey, this guy would work on ESPN, just so you guys know. Although him not being able to cuss, I don't think would go very well either. But that is a whole bunch of other worms that we could let out of the jar. I do really appreciate you, Sopan, making time for us here, given how busy everything is. I was really disappointed to find out what went on there at the Times with the sports desk, and I'm really pulling for all of you guys. You guys have done incredible work over the years, and I look forward to, you know, following and supporting your stuff wherever you wind up after the everything falls through or goes through with the Times.
Well, thank you so much for having me, man. Look, I'll always be available for you, man. Maybe more available than I was before. So let me know.
Well, you and me both. We'll just sit here. We'll just talk on the podcast all the time while we figure this out. Again, that is Sopan Deb of the Times. You can check out his work over there, as well as his memoir, which is in his Twitter profile at Sopan Deb as well. You can. I'm really fascinated by this play thing. The play thing is just wild to me. It's such a cool endeavor, and And apparently Lawrence Fishburne was at your was at the staging that you went to, and I'm looking forward to Lawrence Fishburne, being in your play. That's gonna be really cool.
Well, it's an all South Asian. It's an all South Asian character. So I don't know how if I can swing that, but I can always write a part in for him.
There you go. All right. Thank you very much, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, man. Talk soon.